point, it's time to start talking about emerging adulthood. Now, emerging adulthood is a fairly recently recognized transitional stage of development. This is a period between the ages of about age 18 and 25. Sometimes I'll see 19 to 26 for some studies, for some, but it's an approximate age range. But the idea here is that it's a separate developmental stage between adolescence and full-blown adulthood that is a time of transition in many ways. There was a time where we didn't acknowledge this. We thought of people as just jumping from adolescence to adulthood. And in terms of social roles and expectations, a lot of folks, when they were 18, they were expected to live as a full-blown adult. And so this is a fairly recent and in many ways a very Western concept that we have such a stage as emerging adulthood. Now, some people have criticized this as saying that it's very, discussion of emerging adulthood is very centralized, centrated on Western cultures, particularly, your white, your weird cultures, if you've heard of that abbreviation. And the thing is, we are actually seeing more cross-cultural evidence for other cultures having something like emerging adulthood starting to happen, starting to see the reality of this. And so with emerging adulthood, for this particular chapter, using the textbook that I use for teaching this class at the moment, at the time of recording, there is only one chapter for emerging adulthood. A lot of the other ages and stages have 2 chapters to go along with them. So there's only one chapter, and I'm not even going to cover the whole chapter. I'm going to kind of do the highlights because it is a lifespan course. We have to cram the whole lifespan into a single semester, and it's a lot. And so let's talk about some of the unique things that we see during emerging adulthood. So first of all, in terms of physical health, emerging adulthood for your average typical individual, it's a pretty dang good time for physical health. Even for those who aren't, if they may not see themselves as particularly physically healthy, compared to later points in the lifespan, they're probably much better. So this is a time of particularly strong and active bodies. Usually they have their best health of the lifespan for most people during this time. Just less illness, less injury. The body can handle, potential injury a lot better. Optimal functioning in every body system, including sexual functioning, lung capacity, cardiovascular functioning. Just lots of evidence for just being at your best physically. Now, other things that are important to point out is that lifestyle certainly will overlap. So it's still good to have a nice, healthy, fit lifestyle and try not to eat junk food all day long, but also that things like exercise, it's easier at this age, and because of having that better lung capacity, having less wear and tear on the body, a lot of things contribute. Now, some other key, unique aspects of emerging adulthood is we have to talk about some historical differences. So emerging adulthood, not only is it more about, it's a recognized stage of development, there is this more recognition that a person who's, say, 19 is not quite the full-blown adult yet. And there are also some social differences and changes that we have to acknowledge. So the age of marriage has gotten later. A lot of people are delaying when they get married, whereas, some of the generations above me in my family, they just talk about how, after high school, it's like, all right, need to find a wife, need to find a husband. It happened very quickly. My grandmother got married at 23, and she was really big at telling me how she was panicking because that was late. That was almost a shame on the family that she made it to 23 and was not married yet. And then, of course, when I was 23, and I had graduated from college, talking about my plans for the future. And I said, yeah, I remember you were saying how when you got married at this age, it was late. And she's like, yeah, but I look at you and I feel like it's too early for that. You know, differences, different ideas, different attitudes about when things should happen. Now, some other changes that we have to acknowledge. Okay, so the sexual reproductive system is especially vigorous during emerging adulthood. So interest in sex and enjoyment during sex, it's much easier. Actually, it's much easier to orgasm in emerging adulthood than any other period. I always like to just throw out fun facts like that sometimes for students to be like, oh, really? I did not know that. You know, not like you can't have them later, just that it's particularly easy during emerging adulthood based on research. All right. There are still possible consequences of sexual behavior, though, especially if it's of the heterosexual, you know, traditional sexual intercourse variety. All right. Things like pregnancy can occur, sexually transmitted infections, of course. And nowadays, compared to, you know, generations before us, there are different options available so that one can be sexually active and not necessarily have to enter into pregnancy. And so we also have more social acceptability. Now, not full acceptability in all areas, but less stigma for single parenthood, unplanned pregnancy. You know, certainly sex outside of marriage is a lot more, you know, social acceptance and tolerance. There are some definitely social differences where you can explore sexuality during this time without necessarily having it within marriage or the intent of marriage or being forced to marriage. There are the shotgun wedding. That you see less of that. Not like you never have, you know, you must marry this person right now. Lost my place for a second. And so we now have contraception and, okay, you have contraception. There's no longer the expectation that you have to marry somebody if you're sexually active or a pregnancy results. And many people are engaging in parenthood without necessarily being married to the other biological parent of the child. And so those are some, you know, some big differences, you know, compared to earlier generations. You know, earlier folks in my family of earlier generations have at times been very explicit about how big of a deal it was when the oral contraception, when the pill was invented. It was just this, not everybody could get it at first, certainly, but it was just this eye-opening thing like, wait, people can do that without having to worry about pregnancy? What? And then also, you know, stories will trickle down. It's like, oh yeah, the only reason they got married is because they got pregnant. It's like, oh, I don't want to think of that, you know, but, you know, the stories, families had stories like that. And again, in this class, I never am going to talk about what people should do, what you should approve of, you know, just acknowledging what happens. Now, other differences about emerging adulthood in terms of sexuality, reproductive health. So the sex drive is particularly powerful. Also, infertility is at its lowest point. So you do have to attend to those issues. Miscarriage risk is lowest during this time. Sometimes people will be surprised, like, oh, what about, you know, younger folks? What about adolescents? Adolescents are still growing. There are a lot more risks with adolescents, younger folks. The peak time for pregnancy-related stuff is during emerging adulthood. You know, even though a lot of the people, for social reasons, are not necessarily ready for parenthood. Pregnancy complications are much less. Birth complications are fewer during this time. And so, you know, those are some things to consider too. And all right, so, and as mentioned, not always getting married, not always thinking about pregnancy or parenting at this time. All right, so in the next video about emerging adulthood, I will talk about some other issues, but this will be the end of the first one.